Could I tell you a little bit about Satan? That in the court of heaven, Satan is the district attorney. He is not, as Christians imagine, the enemy of heaven and the enemy of mankind. He's merely the person who sees the bad side of things and carries out the dirty work.
Something that I find repulsive about especially monotheistic messianic religion. With a large part of itself, it quite clearly wants us all to die.
A new consciousness is developing which sees the earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed.
Welcome to Deferred Gnosis. We live in a world of Gnosis Deferred. The primary purpose of Deferred Gnosis is to bring together contrasting perspectives to relentlessly investigate the whys and wherefores most are unwilling to explore. We will grasp those fleeting eternal truths necessary to liberate us from the shackles of sedentary belief. We will sharpen reason against the whetstone of radical thought. Welcome to another episode of Deferred Gnosis Podcast. I am your host, Shea Bilé. It's great to be here with you again. A couple of years ago, I was guest on a podcast with my friend Sam Mann. I was on one episode in a second. We talked about, or I was guest host there to give my input about Satanism and kind of its position in music. But I want to introduce to you Sam Mann from the Still Legion podcast. How are you, brother?
Shea, I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
I appreciate you having me on. I've been a fan of your work and a listener of your show since before I actually knew you. So it's an honor to be here, man. I really appreciate it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. The times I was on your podcast were great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean that the first time we had you on, which has been like almost 2 years now. I think with one exception where we actually debuted a single from a band. Other than that, it's been the most listened to episode. And, you know, every month or so I'll go in and look at the numbers. And there's that episode 8 with Shea Bilé, like just right up there near the top or at the top. So it's
Satan sells, man. Satan
sells, yeah. No, but I was really glad. I guess maybe, tell your audience how I know you or why I know you. But I previously had a co-host. I still do the show. We're in year 3 now. But for most of that first year, I had a co-host, Kiefer, and he and I were discussing, even before we recorded episode 1, like some topics we wanted to cover. And we knew we wanted to cover like this satanic influence, for lack of a better term, in the metal community, both legit and not so legit. I think, like there's probably, anybody that knows anyone who's a metalhead, probably that person themselves or a few of their friends are always like, I just like metal. I don't fucking kill babies, and I'm not a Satan worshiper, and I'm not evil. And so like we wanted to dispel some myths, but also hit on the truths. And so I messaged you and I was just like, hey, I listened to your show and you always have these cool guests. Like, do you know of anyone that would come on? And you were like, dude, I'll come on. And fuck, you're like, you were great. You had all the knowledge we needed. So yeah, we just had you back on recently to talk about the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. Oh yeah, the
satanic ritual abuse era. I had a lot of fun talking about that because that's not a topic that a lot bring up. But you bring up a point in metal, and it's always, I wonder if it's one that always influenced me. So I was always about the content. I was always about the message. What attracted me to like black metal, death metal initially was the imagery, was the philosophy, was the satanic overture, right?
Sure.
And, once I investigated and I would try to talk about it to fellow people in the scene, they'd be like, well, fuck that. That's, I don't really believe in that shit. All religions are stupid. Kind of thing. You know what I mean? They'd be like,
yeah,
fuck that. I don't really believe in any of that.
I think part of why I'm here. Yeah. We'll get into that.
No, that's right. Yeah. And that kind of brings us to the topic at hand. How does a Satanist defend himself against an atheist?
Yeah, but as someone who has enjoyed more than their fair share of like watching Christians get hitch slapped on YouTube.
Oh, dude, I watched that for hours.
I thought, from what teeny bit I know about the satanic community, they share a lot of common ground or fraternize often with atheists or secularists or humanists or anti-Christians or anti-Abrahamic religion, people. And so I thought, well, like I've never heard those views defended. And, maybe I haven't looked hard enough, but I thought it's just something you don't see. Like they're as happy as a non-believer to shit on Christianity or whatever it might be, but like they gotta have some defense for their own faith. And you and I had talked, I think we've enjoyed working together, and so we talked about maybe some other ideas or something we could do, but maybe they wouldn't necessarily fit onto my heavy metal podcast. And that was just a question I asked, and you're like, dude, fuck, great question. So that's kind of, I think, what I'm curious about.
Right. Well, that's why, and I think that's why your presence here is important. Sam, could you maybe give a bit about where you come from, where your religious beliefs or your position, your perspective, so the listeners can kind of get an idea? Yeah,
sure. Well, I like to categorize myself as a lot of your left-hand antinomian audience can appreciate. I've never been a giant fan of labels. So I don't love the label atheist. Well, for a few reasons. One, I'm not angry at God. I'm not, I don't believe in God, so I'm not this angry atheist. I'm not, there's no word for like, well, I'm a Zeus atheist. Like, that's just fucking known. Like, no one has to say that. So I just don't like the connotation it implies. And it also implies this certainness that is just as stupid, if not stupider, as having the certainty in God, which is having the certainty that there's no God. But agnostic has always kind of struck me as wishy-washy. So I just call myself an unbeliever. I am an unbeliever.
What is your position on Satanism? I mean, you had me on your show.
Yeah.
So from what you...
So
you must not be, you must not be too much in opposition to it.
No, I mean... If you were to ask me, do I have any sort of actual belief or faith in the supernatural, I would tell you, no, I do not. But there are a lot of things about Satanists that I have no problem with, or in fact, I have a soft spot for. So being a metalhead, I have a soft spot for Satan. I mean, from when I was young, the imagery is fantastic. The picture of, and we talked about this when you were on my show, just this Milton-esque anti-hero. He's a great figure. As someone, like I say, who's kind of had always this antinomian streak, I really admire that.
Right. I mean, it's an alignment with a general concept of liberation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I like the spurning of the creator. I like the spurning of the culture and to do what you're told. I appreciate the lyricism and the poeticism and all these kind of romantic notions that are wrapped up in it. I mean, I'm as quick in line as the next Satanist, the next actual Satanist at the metal concert to be like, check out that T-shirt, that is fucking sick art. I'm going to buy that. I like all that stuff. There are some views that I respect. But, I mean, I don't know if it's my association with metal or even the fact that I've had you on 2 of my episodes, but it's not like my association with the left-hand path is not completely foreign even to outsiders. My wife sent me an article and she said, your people doing good work. And it was some billboard that I think it was the Satanic Temple had taken out in Texas, talking about how, like, our religion doesn't teach us to beat our children in school, and it was like some ad against corporal punishment that was still going on in Texas.
And color books in Florida and stuff like that.
Yes, and then my brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband, he had sent me a link recently about something to do with Satanism that I think is, I'm going to speak for him here, I think as a fellow unbeliever, he found quite humorous because it was a big fucking thorn in the side of the conservative right. And he's like, hey, you'll like this. So, I get these links shared with me. So I would say I have a soft spot for you all.
Great. So we're starting in a good place, I guess.
I think there's some common ground.
You're solidly a non-believer, but at the same time, you're a bit sympathetic. So we have to kind of go into... So this idea of how would a Satanist defend his or her beliefs against an atheist? Why we're going into that, I mean, we can go into how a Satanist would defend himself against a Christian or a Muslim or so forth, but I mean, I think we're already familiar with that feud, no?
Yeah, I would agree. I think maybe how we should do it is, let me lay out a few statements, and then you can respond to them. And then and maybe we'll take it from there.
Okay.
So, I should say as a caveat beforehand, and I think I touched on this before, and if I'm repeating myself, forgive me, but I don't like the term, materialist. I practice meditation. I do think there is something we don't know about the human condition. There is moments of transcendence that you can achieve or touch or glimpse. There are things that go beyond the senses we have. And there are obviously things that go beyond what we can explain. So I do want to be sensitive to that. However, I think it's good, especially for the world we live in, the Western world,
right,
to base our societies around reality. And I guess I should say as another caveat, I don't think that religion is unimportant. I think to understand the human story, to understand human culture, to understand human history, there are parables and tales and analogies and archetypes that are very valuable to be found in a lot of religions. But that said, because they're important and because they're valuable, it doesn't mean that we should base our societies and our governments around them. Shakespeare is important and valuable. And I think anyone that doesn't have an appreciation for the written word and goes throughout life without it is really, really missing out. But we're not going to, we're not basing laws around your understanding of literature and Shakespeare. And so I would say, what is it that, as a Satanist, what is it that you can point to as solid ground for your belief? What is it what makes you any different than any other religious person in the regard that you're just relying on faith alone?
Right. So for myself, and I think for a lot of people that come onto the left-hand path, and, to be quite honest, a lot of these other and we mentioned some of them, a lot of these other fringe, or what some would say radical systems of belief or practices, there is something there that drives on a very deep level this idea that these things aren't quite working for me. The world that I live in far as tradition or mainstream systems of belief, does not define who I am. There's something about me that is different. There's something that doesn't quite feel right. And we also touched a little bit on Satan as kind of a symbol of liberation. I think sometimes that speaks on such a deep level that it initiates a transformation and someone finds a deeper relation to it than simply an aesthetic one. It becomes a essential part of one's identity and a way in which you view reality. That, I think, everyone has a story. Sometimes this idea, like in my own case, I faced a lot of challenges, a lot of people have as a child, and I was made to feel of little value. And I know there's people listening that have been in a situation like this. So I think it's important to say. And when I was first exposed, I was exposed to Magick. And Magick told me that I can change my situation. Magick gave me this sense of empowerment that I can change the world around me. And I thought, fucking finally, I can do something about this. And that was incredibly powerful. And that went on for a little while. And then I started to pick up on, Anton LaVey and the Satanic Bible. A lot of us were introduced, especially those from Generation X and a lot of millennials. Their first exposure to Satanism was through Anton LaVey. I have no shame in that. And I remember when I read the Satanic Bible in one sitting. I was 13 years old. I had also seen it I was at Borders, which I don't even know if that exists anymore, but I'd picked up satanic rituals and I had read through it. On the altar of the devil, up is down, freedom is slavery, pleasure is pain, and something hit me. And when I read through the Satanic Bible, I thought, fuck, I can proclaim, or I can assert my own value. I don't have to rely on others doing that. I don't have to rely on anyone else. Even in the Satanic Bible, it says, now mind you, I'm not an atheist today. I wouldn't call myself a LaVeyan Satanist, at all, there's some parts of it that I do. But at the time, that idea that you are your own God, and he even talks about the birthday being the highest holiday. It's this idea that even if no one cares about your birthday, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you give value to yourself. That changed my fucking life. That gave me this deeply rooted realization of who I am. It inspired in me a type of courage, confidence, love for myself. In many ways, I look back on it and I realize that is what saved me. That is what saved me from my situation. Now, people can, and this is why I have, at least in my position, and we could talk about this a bit later, this is why I do have respect for a lot of other religions and spirituality, because I think it can help you recover. It can give you strength. It can give you confidence. And like a lot of other religions, in a different way, Satanism gives you a path to liberation, emancipation, just like that satanic figure. It gives you an idea to find value in yourself in a world that has tried to tell you don't have any. So, why I've fallen into this lifestyle, why I've fallen into this passionate belief as a left-hand path adherent, as an impassioned spiritual adherent, is because it has guided me in a fundamental way. It has empowered me to change my life completely, to acquire the things I thought would have been impossible, and to see myself and create myself in a way that I would have also thought were impossible. So if you were to ask me, why is it that I'm drawn to the left-hand path and to Satanism in specific terms, it is because it empowered me to become my better self.
All right, that's a fair answer. It's a good answer. I'm glad that you are your better self, I should say.
Thanks, it's been a journey.
I hear that. As someone who stayed after church their entire childhood to clean up after the choir and was forced to do handbell choir, my journey was different, but I hear you. It's been quite a journey. Nothing strikes me about what you said as particularly giving credence to supernatural. It's great. I'm genuinely happy that you felt empowered and that you, like as you say, it saved you from your situation. But there are many things, depending on the person and the situation, that can do that.
Well, I didn't do those things.
That's true. But what makes your belief in magic and the supernatural, what substantiates it beyond what it's done for you? I mean, you can believe anything you want if it helps you. I get that. But when the rubber meets the road and you're trying to tell someone, let me tell you why the path I'm going down is a good path, there has to be something more to it than because this is what worked for me.
Okay, so let me maybe rephrase your or rephrase it the way I'm understanding it. So, Shea, it sounds like you subscribe to some form of supernaturalism, but what's the evidence for it? Am I right?
That's a fair take.
For one, I'm not trying to really prove it to you. And I don't know if I feel the need to. For me, specifically, like I said, I am not going to spend too much time working with things that don't work for me. So I'll give a very quick kind of explanation of what I think magic is. I think it can exist in several ways. And some of these ways are a bit agnostic, but I am a believer. You know, I could say that. I could say that in several regards. But if I've had certain experiences where I use magic and if I've put out my will and I've seen dramatic changes and it's happened in very real ways. I've had experiences of radical synchronicities, dreams where things are communicated to me. And I've had these experiences that were very potent. So on one level, let me just say this. On one level, those experiences can be empowering. It can be kind of poetic. It can be psychological. If you're trying to do a ritual to get a job and you have candles around you and you're reciting these incantations, and it may just, from a completely secular atheist position, it may empower you with the confidence needed to do well at that interview, to prepare, because you feel like you have something behind you. And that's fine. I'm going to admit that's real. Shit, you might have to admit that's real. I mean, that says Psychology 101. That's Self-Help 101. Having said that, in my situation and many others, if you put this out and you see dramatic ways that it materializes, synchronicities that are so off the wall, so to speak, or so dramatic, dreams that almost manifest as prophecies, or signs that manifest as prophecies, or visions. I have very, very livid dreams. As a child, I grew up in what some would call a haunted house. I had a lot of dreams where spirits manifested and tried to speak to me, and I've had things like that all my life. And I've had visions and dreams that would manifest in life. I've seen magic manifest in ways that is just, look, I try to be a discerning individual, and I try to doubt and judge situations and assess them in a rational way. But things have occurred that I would be a fool to deny. I would have to be almost deceitful. I would have to be deceitful. I would have to say that I'm in a constant state of dropping acid. Every day I've dropped acid for the last, 20 years.
Right.
So I will say this. I've had experiences, so I guess I'll put it like this to you, to say it succinctly. I've had experiences that is very difficult for me to deny, and therefore I hold belief that they are real in a measurable way for me. If I were to gather statistics and I were to take this in a evidence basis, I would have, it wouldn't be Sigma 6 or whatever you call it. It wouldn't be scientific confirmation, but I would have a lot there to support a belief in it. But I'll tell you this, even if it doesn't fucking exist, it has had a lot of positive impact on me. So I will then turn the question on you. Why does it matter that it's real in some, so we could chart it down and put a microscope over it? Why is it important that we can verify it in a lab? And it seems like you might be ignoring the fact that it's the auxiliary or the other benefits that are far more powerful. I mean, these things are going to have an effect on people that's more in power, whether it's real in a scientific sense or a materialist sense, what does it even matter?
All right, it's a good question. So my answer to it would not be simple, but I'll try to not ramble here. So let me try to get a few of the answers in here in a relatively coherent way. I think that, relatively speaking, based on what we know to be true of, say, the physical world, or our physical bodies, or even the physical cosmos, as much as we can measure them and know them, there's very little we know in regards to the mind, to the brain. And I think it is a fascinating area for discovery and exploration. And I will no doubt concede that whether something is true or not, its perceived truth or its realized impact can be huge in your life. As someone who does practice meditation, I mean, there are times, very few and very brief. And I thought of this when I was listening to your last episode with Jack. And as an aside, by the way, Jack, I could listen to you read anything. So just, you need to be back on the podcast. I'm looking forward to that. So when you were talking to Jack about your suspension, I thought of this as someone who's never been suspended, and I'm not a squeamish sort. I've got no problem. I mean, I'll watch medical shows. When my wife had her first kid, our son, I watched the C-section. I watched him cut her open and stretch her out and pull him out.
Right.
That stuff fascinates me.
Right.
But even I was just listening to your description of that, the lancets through the eyebrow didn't bother me, but just the description of your getting suspended was ugh. But then when you talked about the feeling you had where your mind was still, there have been little glimpses I've got of that through meditation where there's really nothing. There was a famous author whose name completely is lost on me at the moment. He often referred to it in the realm of meditation as having no head. Where is this locus of attention? Where are you? You think you're behind your eyes? You think you're behind your forehead? And there's times that, you'll be meditating with your eyes open and you'll focus on something. I remember once I was focusing on a door frame. And quickly I turned attention on itself and there was nothing there. The door frame was there, whether I was looking at it or not. The only thing we know of for sure is what we're conscious of. And so there are these things that I will grant you, whether they're true or not, are powerful and should be held in regard and esteem. But I look at that as a mystery of the mind. I look at that as the mystery of the nature of consciousness. Both the hard problem of consciousness and other problems of it. I feel like we know our brains are unreliable. We know that the mind is a tricky, tricky thing. We probably both, and people listening have all had this experience where you tell yourself a lie, and I don't mean some lie like you're deceitful to yourself and you're deceiving yourself, but a white lie or a reimagining of a past experience. And that reimagining, that recollection of that experience is so ingrained in who we are that it's actually irrelevant if it ever happened or not. Because in fact, it probably didn't exactly happen that way. Memory and recall are tricky, very unreliable things. So I look at this as, one, a mystery of what we don't yet know about the mind. And are you familiar with what's referred to as the God of the gaps? Is that a
Absolutely.
phrase?
I understand.
So, yeah, it's just this... I have no problem acknowledging the unknown. I have no problem acknowledging that there's something beyond what my normal five senses can tell me. And whatever that is profound.
Right.
But I think to acknowledge it is one thing. To place faith in it is a different thing. because I think where we place our faith, and what I'm just going to call here God, and where God is not, where we cannot, I'm sorry, where our understanding is not, where our knowledge is not, and if we just call that God, whether that God to you is Satan or whoever, Thor, Allah, Buddha.
Right, here we go.
Yeah, you're placing them in this ever shrinking, receding pocket of. You're placing them at the frontier of knowledge, and that frontier, although it may never be crossed, it is continually shrinking. It's continually being pushed into the distance.
Well, you're inserting a lot of you're making a lot of assessments on how belief manifests, and especially how it manifests in a left-hand pathway, and even further how it manifests in my case. I mean, one, you're saying that we're putting so the God of the gap, so there's mystery out there. Okay, that's fine, but then you're saying that, well, we're taking that bit of mystery that science hasn't somehow discovered and measured and verified, and we're taking that room and we're throwing in magical beliefs and other things, as if we're waiting for any moment for some type of peer-reviewed study to come out and prove what we've been leaving is somehow bullshit.
Well, I don't think you're waiting for it. I mean, I don't think anybody that places any belief in beyond that frontier.
But you said that you mentioned these gods. You said Thor and you said God, and then you kind of implied that we'd be putting Satan there also. Like there's some type of analogous situation happening. Now, that's not the case with me, and that's not the case with a lot of Satanists.
I would say analogous in a non. I would say there is analogous in this way. There is some sort of theistic belief or framework that holds root in that area.
To put it simply, no. But also, what is... And with the left-hand path, it gets a lot more tricky, man. Because, we have to discuss what the role of theism has to play in the left-hand path. And then, if you're asking me directly on my personal praxis or gnosis, then you have to ask me what my feelings are towards theism. So you can't make a statement that there's something behind these beliefs that is theistically founded. I mean, we're not starting at the right point, an accurate point, I should say.
Let me do two things. And then I think we can dive in a little more personally as it relates to you. Two things. Would you call, and I'm not setting you up here so I can slam you down. I'm seriously asking, would you call the neo-pagan movement or the pagan religion as it sits today, is that left-hand path?
For the most part, I would have to say no. Okay. And that's a pretty big no. I try not to speak in absolutes, but that's a pretty big no. Okay,
that's what I wanted to know. And secondly, there was a part of your previous question that I didn't answer because I rambled too much. Like I said, it was a multi-answered question, and I thought I might get rambling. So, why do we need to quantify it? That's the gist of what you asked. Why do we need to measure it, quantify
Yeah, because, what's important is function. This whole binary of... you said... you have a background in philosophy just as I do. I have an academic background in philosophy and religious studies. So this idea of, first of all, discussing existentially what is real. You talked about the problem of evil. Another question is what is reality as we understand it in sensorial external experience. So it's like, Shea, well, what is, we're asking a question, well, what is real? And I want you to explain why you think supernaturalism is real. There's already a problem. There's already a problem there. And then the need to quantify it because we have function. Why is a song important? Why is a poem important? Why is the moment your child was born and the moment my child is born and it fucking hit us like an earthquake, like a wave? And why is that important? It's the same answer to why spirituality is important. So in function, there's not really, I mean, we could discuss aesthetics and we could discuss the human brain and we could discuss neurology and how that empowers us and all of the beauty that's in that. But if you want to try to talk about what is real, we can go into that. So that's where the question kind of came from, why quantify it?
Right. So, yeah. Now, we can get into what is real, but I'm going to resist that temptation.
That's
only
another podcast. That's like 4 podcasts.
That's
a whole podcast on its own. That's a whole show.
It's a whole show that's going to run for 50 years and like really never have a finale in sight. So,
right.
Right. I mean, I've even granted you the only thing we can know for sure is what our consciousness tells us. So your consciousness can tell you that magic fucking worked. And my consciousness can tell me that's a fucking door frame, man. And that's all that matters, right? So yes, we could get deep into the weeds here. So I'll resist the temptation to do so. I like your relating it to a song. As someone who grew up in a musical family, fortunately a lot of music I'll never repeat because it was a lot of hymns, but nonetheless,
who does a podcast based on music?
That does a podcast based on music. It's a great analogy. Why is music important? But there's a couple things that differentiate it. One, and I'm going to speak in an absolute, and I know it's not an absolute. I know there's a difference here. And I know that on the individual level, there's a lot of room for wiggle room in what I'm about to say. But for people on the whole, societies as a whole, cultures as a whole, music is important, absolutely. But it doesn't dictate how we run our lives. Now, it may dictate choices we make. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm speaking in absolutes. There are lots of cultures and have been cultures and will be cultures that value music more than culture X or Y. And that will make decisions based on the importance of that music. But society as a whole, it's not guided by music. It's this beautiful companion on the ship that we have, the ship of the journey through life, and we are happy we have it. We want to keep having it. We want to keep it there. We want to keep exploring it. We want to get to know our relationship with music better. There are things that could only be expressed best and most adequately through music, but it's not guiding the ship we're on. So what I would say,
I don't know if that's true.
Again, I don't want to speak in absolutes because for an individual, music can be the guide. Music can be the ship. But as a society, well, I sure as fuck hope not in the Western world we're living in today that popular music isn't guiding all culture.
I mean, that's almost undeniable.
Well,
art defines what we are.
So but see, I think art reflects who and what we are. But I don't think I think that art is a description of the journey. Art is not the goal in the end zone.
I mean, you talked about how metal made you feel and how the image of how the image of Satan kind of inspired you and you saw what it did to other people. So clearly that can have dramatic effects on who you are and how you identify as a person. I mean, you and I both know people that are so influenced by music, it fucking informs who they are.
Absolutely. But I think that music, I'm not saying it's the only one, but for purposes of this discussion, music is the language, it's one of the languages that we write the tale of our life in, that we write the story of our life in. And we might know where we want that story to go, or we might be influenced by what we write on the page. And that dictates how future pages will be written. But music isn't the guide marker to answer what's beyond the end of that book. It's what we're writing the tapestry in. But I don't think it answers, not like faith. Music is important, and it absolutely can shape one's identity, some more so than others. A musician, obviously, for example. It can shape us, but it's a belief. It doesn't require a belief in the supernatural. It doesn't require a belief in some unknowable thing. And to get back to why it's good to measure or quantify. Because faith in something greater, faith in more than just our material world and more than what we can understand, is such a guidepost for our lives as individuals and as cultures and as societies, and sadly, even in this freedom of religion country, governments. We have to be able to quantify where we've gone wrong, where we've gone right, what we know, what we don't know. How can we figure out what we don't know? How can we teach that, share that, and use that to move forward? And so while I do absolutely respect and am glad for you and your personal experiences, it's hard to quantify, and therefore it's hard to attain and retain and retrain that knowledge. Not to say you can't do it in some way, shape, or form, but you have to admit it would be easier and maybe better for everybody if you could easily quantify these things you've experienced, and you could share those with others, and they could get the same benefits from them that you did.
But I can take my experiences and share and teach others. In what way are you saying that I can't?
Well, in a way that we can, as you said, measure and quantitate and define and understand. Like,
well,
I guess
one tiny part of it. So, Shea, can you pitch up a camcorder or turn on your phone and record like a demon appearing to you in your dreams? Otherwise, if you can't do that, I think it's problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't going for that specific example, but like, sure, let's take that example.
Why is it problematic? Why is it problematic if I can't?
Because this demon that appears to you in this dream, this is a big thing to you. This isn't just some random thing that happened one time. This is defining you. This is so much so that it's part of what you call your faith, your belief system. And so, yes, if we're to understand and if we're to live our lives, what faith do I have, pardon the pun, to know that what you experience is what actually happened, and that it can happen to me too?
Well, the last time I checked, we have autonomy, and we have the ability to individually express ourselves, and whatever happens to me ever, ever, ever is not going to really be what happens to you ever, ever, ever. We can have things that we can agree upon, but it's a collective agreement. We come into it sharing feelings, and sometimes those align enough that we can say that in such terms that we could say we have even a community, some type of shared identity, that we all agree upon a certain thing in a certain way. But what you feel when you ride a motorcycle, or what you feel when you eat a cheese pizza at your favorite restaurant, or what you feel after a good session of sex, is not going to be exactly like what your friend John feels when he does the same thing, or what I feel when I do the same thing. So how am I going to reproduce my experience with someone else, and what's the point? How am I going to have them feel it in the exact same way, and what's the point? Is there a need for that congruency?
So I have a two-part answer to this one also. So one, I have learned in the last bit here that we've been on, I think there's something intrinsic about your faith that makes it actually really hard to debate. Harder than, say, a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew. Because the selfish nature of Satanism kind of doesn't give a fuck all for what other people think.
Not all Satanism is selfish, by the way. Or the left-hand path, rather. Definitely not the left-hand path as a whole.
Well, I don't want to imply that you're all selfish, but there is a selfish nature to it, I would think, that's kind of intrinsic, at least to the satanic character or being or spirit, right? That you don't have to be told. You don't have to follow God's laws. You don't have to, like you said earlier, you can be empowered by your own self, right? That sense of self. And because that's so important, unlike debating somebody from one of the other, what I'll call big three Abrahamic faiths, they do think that everybody needs to get right with God. Whereas it's becoming a little more apparent to me that that's really not a concern of yours, at least not certainly to that degree. So whereas you can say, what does it fucking matter if you experience it like I experience? Or what does it fucking matter if you get what it from I can get from it? Whereas if I was debating anyone else of those, like I say, those big three, they would say, well, it matters because that's what God wants.
And you need to be saved.
And you need to be saved. Right.
So it is fair to say there's a tiny sliver of Abrahamic practitioners, the big three as you call them, that don't actually care what you believe.
Sure.
And there's a tiny sliver of the left-hand path that does care what you believe.
Okay.
So for the most part, people in the left-hand path don't give a fuck all what other people believe in, whether they believe in them or whether they believe in what they do or whether they share the experience. The path is a lonely one. You're not trying to convert anybody. There's a lot of expressions of Satanism or the left-hand path. You're not trying to convert anyone. In fact, you almost self-impose solitary practice.
Yeah. You know, I'm reminded of something you said on I believe it was your first appearance a couple years back on my show, when you said one of the most important things we can do is to question all things. And so I guess that's what I'm doing here. I guess that's what I'm doing in my life, is to question all things. And I guess it comes down to, what answer are you going to be satisfied with? You can tell me, Sam, when you eat a slice of pizza, you are going to feel at this restaurant, this particular restaurant, fuck, they make the best pizza. And I can't describe it to you, but when you take a bite, you'll know it. Trust me, you're going to feel this fucking feeling. And I'm going to bite into that and I'm going to say, fuck, that is some great pizza. And what it's like for me to experience that is not what it's like for you to experience that. But you can at least give me a sense. You can say you're going to experience something. Then I can tell you why. You're going to taste it, and the fat and the salt and all this, right? It's going to get on your tongue, and it's going to release this stuff in your brain. And you can quantify why I'm feeling a certain way, even though you can't quantify the exact way I feel. You can quantify what got me there, how this pizza interacted with my physiology to get me to that place.
Yes.
And so I guess what I'm feeling like is you might find a certain experience or enlightenment, is a word maybe you could use, this profound, transcendent experience or moment. And yes, yours will be different than everyone else's. Like when you're performing, I'm sure there's people that are watching you that are having some sort of experience. But if you're praying to or summoning or channeling some sort of power beyond, you can appreciate the experience you're having and the experience that person watching you is having. But what's getting you both there, it would be tough to quantify. It would be tough, maybe not for you to quantify, but for them to agree on that definition would be very tough. Whereas it's not tough for us to agree on why we both fucking love this pizza. And so I guess it depends for a person of the left-hand path or a person of a more atheistic or humanistic or, as I like to say, unbelieving persuasion, what answer are you going to be satisfied with? Because like you, I like to question.
Right.
I like to question all things.
I don't know if that's true. You're talking about the pizza. I don't even have to. I could take it further to something more analogous, but we could even let's go from the pizza analogy. You're gonna say you're gonna like it for a good reason, so on and so forth. There's someone that's gonna eat that and be allergic to dairy, and they're not gonna experience it at all like you. But going towards the idea of magic and religious experience, this is something we can quantify. It has been quantified. It has been studied. You said that you're into meditation.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of empirical studies that have been done they call them meditators. I hate that term, by the way. It sounds silly. But
meditators is a dumb term.
Yeah, dude.
I agree with you. That just sounds like someone who like meditates their entire life. It's like when you're in high school, no one calls you a debater because that's like there's just too many master debater jokes. Right. You know, yeah.
But yeah, we see growth in the brain. We see activity where it usually doesn't occur. With religious experience, you see parts of the brain that are going off that are similar maybe to some other experiences. But we can measure that. We can measure what someone's going through who's going through religious ecstasy, and we right.
And we can. You're right. There has been neurological work done that shows how a brain experiencing something spiritual looks very different from a brain that does not. But I guess where my hang-up would be, or maybe where I want to stop down this path, is you and I, let's say you're suspended. For the sake of this argument, let's say that like some meditation session that I'm having, a really good one, and you're having a suspension session, and it's a good one. And if somehow I could meditate and you could be suspended while they can image our brains, maybe our brains would look similar in that respect. We got some heightened activity. We've got some blood flow going where normally it's not so heavy. Where normally you only find that in people that are having some sort of spiritual experience or mystical experience. It would be, as you would say, the blood would be pumping in the same place where some Christian who's, praying in front of the crucifix has got their blood pumping. But my experience does not require a belief in the unknown, a belief in a supernatural power, or a belief in a deity or a spirit or a force of something that I believe to be real. I could maybe just say, yes, that same part of my brain was active as yours, although strangely, you got there with this faith, and I did not. And so I guess I'm just more comfortable saying it's achievable without a faith in the supernatural.
So I do subscribe to things that some would call supernatural, and I believe them, and I'm not gonna, I have no shame in saying that. But as an example, suspension, where in that where am I saying anything about a god, a spirit, or supernaturalism that got me into a similar neurological state as you did through meditating?
No,
where is that inserted?
No, I'm not saying that you did say that. I'm just saying hypothetically, if I just use suspension as an example, if we're both, you brought up the study of neurological activity in people, spiritual experiences. But you can find those same or very similar results in people having a spiritual experience that doesn't require faith. So while you may not particularly, I'm not saying that you have some insight to God or gods or spirits while suspended, but you could do some form of religious or spiritual practice that could get that same neural area fired up. And so, yes, I'm not denying the neurological proof that spirituality or faith or religiosity can have an effect on our brains. But what I'm saying is people can get there with or without beliefs in the supernatural, or with varied beliefs in the supernatural.
What? So you got there without having a belief in something, and someone happens to have a belief in that thing, so there's something wrong with that? I'm not following your
question
end game with this particular argument.
So my question is it necessary? Right? So like we talked about questioning in all things. Why is it necessary to have this faith? Why is it necessary to have this viewpoint? Not me individually or you individually, but what, as a society or a species, are we going to benefit from this?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, the answer is, in part, it's not necessary. But I will kind of add to a kind of an implication that I feel is being suggested, and that is, why is it, you're asking why is it necessary, but you also seem to be asking why does it have value? Well, one is, again, it's not, but I will go on even further and argue this. I think transcendental experience is necessary. I will argue for that. Necessary in the sense that I think a healthy human being, I talked about song, and I talked about sex, and I talked about these experiences that give us a heightened experience, the day one of your children were born, and so forth. These kind of things that we have where we, maybe a psychedelic experience or something like that.
And to be fair, to be on the record, I agree with you that transcendental experiences are valuable and important. So
right. Okay. So
I guess maybe I should clarify to clear up your confusion. When I say why is it necessary? Yeah, that's kind of vague and open-ended.
I mean, well, what's the problem?
So this is the problem. In many people's, I would even say most people, let's just go ahead and assume that most people on this planet are religious in one form or another. Whether that's something that they practice in New Guinea that we've never heard of, or it's one of the big three, as I called it, or it's Satanism, or it's Rastafarianism,
right,
or whatever. The problem is your glimpse of the transcendental is tethered to a system of beliefs that carries with it a host of baggage that I would argue is not intrinsically needed or tied to or connected to at all the transcendental experience. You can have a transcendental experience as, say, let's make it easy for most of the Western world here. Let's say as a Christian, I can have some sort of transcendental experience. And I felt this. As a Christian, I did feel this. As a youth growing up, I felt something big and something beyond and something greater than I was at a few key specific moments that, I don't mean like on the whole, like every day I walked around with this, that Jesus is up there and he's doing all this for me. I just mean specific moments where like you tasted that, you glimpsed that.
Right.
But sadly, I can say now, not at the time, but sadly, I then want to attribute that experience to my faith that also comes with it all these other attitudes and beliefs and practices and behaviors that quite honestly could be a big fucking pain in the ass for a lot of people.
All right. So there's two things, and I think one is a bigger one. So the first point, all this extra baggage, so on and so forth. So because you like vanilla ice cream, I must also like vanilla ice cream. That is to say that because mine is a more materialist based, or I don't attach a certain paradigm or framework to it, therefore that is superior. So to me, that's problematic. But the second part that you're talking about is there's extra baggage, and I kind of, I understand where you're coming from. I relate to it. I get pissed off too when I hear about people driving cars into fucking daycare centers or bombing abortion clinics. That fucking makes me angry too. However, you had said that transcendental experience is important. Now, we've agreed on that. There needs to be a connection, whether it's spiritual, whether it's religious, whether it's transcendental. It's just what life is made of, and I think that's what brings importance to our lives. And if we don't have things like that give us meaning, it tends to seem like there's issues. It tends to seem people have issues with life, and it has a psychological effect. We can agree on that, kind of. That's more or less going to be, factual or whatever you would call it for sake of the argument. But you're claiming that, religion often informs political, ethical, and moral belief, which is true. That is true. However, two parts to that also. So one, people are going to be informed by ethical, moral beliefs elsewhere no matter what. It's the reality of the human creature. If it's not religion, it's going to be politics. It's going to be the world they live in. It's the people they are around. It's the art that they're into, the music they're into, as we discussed before. And secondly, there is room for beliefs to actually, I don't know what your standpoint is, but say you have any political leaning. Say you are left-leaning. There's going to be religions that promote that code of belief in a very powerful way. So you're talking about there's extra baggage. Someone who has a religious belief to abide by a certain code, that may drive them even further to push that type of belief system. Say you're right-leaning. There's religious beliefs that will enforce that too. Religion and spirituality and transcendental experience have that power. They have the power to push someone to go beyond certain capacities, and it also reinforces belief systems. Just like anything else, that can be good, that can be bad. It's the tools of the human creature, and to be bad, it means you just disagree with it. And to be good means you agree with it. If we're talking about from a humanist perspective, I think there's a lot of things in religion, if those aspects were focused on, would reinforce a humanist perspective. In the left-hand path, for the most part, I mean, how many left-hand path or magical practitioners fucking got out of their car and threatened you with a fucking baseball bat because you didn't switch lanes fast enough? It's just, they're generally going to be nicer people, but you know what? That part doesn't even matter.
I think what worries me, I guess I could say worries me. Now, you're right that our belief systems can be influenced by a whole host of things. Politics, our friends, our family, if not religion, then something else. But some of those other things are more malleable than faith. Because a lot of those... not always, and not in all people.
There's some people that listen to Alex Jones that have done some... You know, I'm not gonna...
well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole different topic.
That have fucking threatened people's lives and went into pizza shops threatening, saying that they're running a pedophile ring and saying people never had kids that died. And
yeah, I mean, the people that listen to
That's
Alex
pretty fundamentalist, you know
Jones,
what I'm saying?
They are zealous and religious in their own right, his hardcore base. But whether we're talking about those people or spirituality or religiosity in the traditional sense, my worry is that we are attributing a transcendental experience to a set of beliefs that carry with it other claims, other attitudes and behaviors that don't need to be associated with that transcendental experience. And while you, personally, or many left-hand practitioners in general, might be nicer people, and you're right, it doesn't fucking matter, but it kind of does, because if more people were nicer people, we'd have a better place. But
sure,
the idea, not idea, I would say the fact, undeniable fact, that people of faith tend to assert that faith's responsibility or power in areas that cannot be provably tied to that faith, and therefore are more likely to take other tenets or beliefs or attitudes or behaviors of said faith out into the world where those specific other ones may cause harm.
Right.
And so while you may not do that, or even I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and be generous and say the majority of left-hand practitioners may not do that. There is a parallel there between all faiths, whether it's left hand, right hand, old school, new age.
You don't think this is a kind of ubiquitous unilateral phenomena with the human experience? I mean, for example, if you take a lot of right-leaning or left-leaning folks, we can, you say you can't really say a lot about a person until you meet them and so on, and that's actually not fucking true. If someone tells me they believe in owning guns, I have about an 80, or they believe in gun rights, I have an 80% chance to guess that they're against abortion. If someone says they believe in climate change, I have a pretty good 80% chance that they're pro-life and they believe in a higher minimum wage.
Sure.
So if one of these are enforced, if they see evidence that climate change is real, it tends to reinforce that general kind of aggregate of belief. So although I agree with what you're saying, if I have a transcendental belief that proves or experience that kind of proves that magic is real, or I'm talking to a particular spirit and something affirmatory or affirmational rather happens, that may enforce holistically my kind of collection of beliefs. Even though I would like to say that I'm thoroughly logical and rational, I believe it's a human trait that I may also that may influence other parts of what I'm doing and go, shit, other things I might doing might be good too. But I argue that that's uniform. Religious and not so much.
There is uniformity, but I don't think it's quite the same.
Are you saying religion is more powerful than other aggregates of belief?
I think it certainly has the potential to be the most powerful form of belief. I'm not saying that it always is. There's certainly, obviously, I'm sure we can find, whether here in Missouri where I am or in California where you are, we can find somebody who's not really religious, and they certainly have some more powerful form of belief than that. Maybe on the left side out there politically where you are, on the right side here where I am. But while there is truth to this claim that you make that I need to know where you stand on abortion and gun control, and I've got, whatever, 75, 60, 55, 85% chance of guessing where you line up on these whole host of other issues. I also see that as a problem. Now, that's a whole other podcast.
Right.
But the binary two-party political framework that we have in this country and the polarization that we have today and these loud fucking vocal extremes that we have on both sides of these, on both ends of this political spectrum we have here in America or the West is a huge problem. And it's a huge problem because I specifically think it's a huge problem because of its similarity to religious faith. Because one belief validified entails the rest of the beliefs are valid. And I don't think, though, on the whole, that is overall as quite profound as faith or religion can be.
I don't think you can control that.
Well,
I don't think that's a
better
thing.
Job. I think we could do a better job controlling it if our political process wasn't so fucking binary. But
it's also could be prevented if our religious affiliations weren't so binary. And as we've talked, you could probably concede that the left-hand path, but I could speak for myself. You can say that it's a little bit more flexible than other things you've seen.
But I would also say this. Let's say, for the sake of this argument and this argument alone, I'm not expressing a personal political opinion. But let's say to you that I said, Shea, the national minimum wage should be $15 an hour. Now, by me saying that, you're going to guess, and we'll say hypothetically you'll guess correctly, pretty close to where I stand on a whole host of other progressive or liberal or democratic stances or issues.
Right.
But let's say that we did enact a federal minimum wage of $15.
Right.
And it worked. For the sake of this argument, let's say it worked. That the economy got better and our society got better and our country, and we can look back in 15, 20, 30, 10, 5, however many years you want, and be like, man, that changed some shit, like for the better. Then I can say to you, this belief has been validated. And therefore, hear me out on these other beliefs. Whereas a transcendental experience is going to be very hard. This goes back to, why do I need to quantify or measure it? Because I can look back in 30 years and say, look at all the data that proves the $15 federal minimum wage was a good move for this country. And we can quantify that and we can measure that. And so then I can say to you, and then it's up to you to hear me out or not, that was a belief that came from this political viewpoint, and therefore, hear me out on this other one. Whereas it's going to be very tough to say that transcendental experience I had can be validated because of my beliefs. Therefore, hear me out on these other beliefs. So there's a bit of a difference there.
Didn't we both say that there's an issue with this kind of blind aggregate of belief anyway? So, I mean, If
Well,
we
yeah,
if we
there's
agree
a-
that
there's-
it's not
there's a-
good to do that anyway, then why are we trying to
Yes.
argue which one's better at it?
Well, I do agree with you that this blind belief or this I believe one thing, therefore I also believe X, Y, and Z. I agree with you that that's bad. Now, one being better than the other is tricky. I mean, is religion more dangerous than political extremism? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I haven't thought about it. They're both dangerous. I do fear the extremes on both sides of the political spectrum that we've got to, where everyone's just fucking shouting. And as an aside, I've been off Facebook for 6 months and it's been beautiful. But I don't know about one being worse than the other. There is a difference to, okay, I'm not a left-wing fanatic. I'm not a right-wing fanatic. But I do hold to these Democratic or Republican or liberal or conservative beliefs. And I can prove to you with data that this one, that one, and this one have worked. Therefore, let's talk about giving these other ones a try. Whereas I just think it's going to be tough to do that with a transcendental experience.
What's the importance, or why is it necessary for either of us to do that? So if you have a system of belief that's political in nature, and you prove that, or you show evidence that climate change is real, then you say, hey, you have gained trust in me, so maybe I can then go to argue that a woman should have a right to her own body. In that same sense, if I share with someone how to use magic successfully, or use spiritual experience successfully, or deep meditation or astral projection or whatever, and then I go, well, if that worked, then you might want to try this other practice. It might give you a similar result. One, this does happen, and religion is completely, or religious or spiritual practices are able to do it. So do you see anything problematic with the example I just gave?
Yes. The problem was what I called earlier the baggage. Now, not you specifically. Religion in general. A belief in what we cannot explain. A belief in the supernatural in general. I could say to you, this worked for you, so hear me out on this other thing. And that could be good. I could say, Shea, I tried these rituals that you taught me, and they worked. I felt something, and so now I want to try the next one, or I want to try a different one, or I want to try suspension, and I could gain some enlightenment or something, and be very happy that happened. As easily as you could do that to me, someone else could say, Bob could say to John, see, John, did that work for you? Yes, it did. Show me more. Ah, I have more. We have to fly the airplanes into the buildings of the infidel. So that's my hang-up with the religion. It goes back to...
Well, I mean, that's pretty... I feel like that's a pretty careless straw man. I mean...
Careless though it may be, it is a legit concern that I have for the religious world.
I have a concern that, you may believe that climate change is real, and by the way, this example does not apply to any of my personal beliefs. I do believe
yes.
climate change is real. Anyway.
As do I.
But you also believe that we should bomb factories in order to help with climate change. We have to kill politicians that rally against acknowledging it. Yeah, I might teach someone to gain confidence to do magic, and then I say, well, that means you should burn down a church. But I also may say, hey, here's another way that you can improve your life as well, or improve your station, or see yourself in a better way, or love yourself and love other people.
No problem with the
don't we have that same threat? Or isn't there the same possibility either way?
That is true. And so, I guess you could say in the larger context, I'm not here to argue against Satanism specifically. Or even, you could say, religion specifically. What I'm here to argue against is a dogmatic viewpoint. A dogmatic viewpoint that, yes, can be found in political activism, can be found in philosophical thought, political thought, religion. But religion does seem to me to have a unique problem inherent in it that the dogmatic belief is not so easily undercut or proven to be false. I can prove to you...
Well, something seeming to you doesn't make it factually true.
Fair enough. So I think we could go round and round on this. And I did not come into this conversation with the expectation that you would convert me to Satanism or I would convert you to atheism. But one thing I do want to touch on is I do get that there are a myriad of ways to practice Satanism. One thing I think that you really kind of opened the door for me and helped me study some more when I had you on my show a couple of years ago. You said something to the effect of, it depends on the practitioner. Depends on, I'm asking you, just to kind of give us the cliff notes on what Satanism is and how your beliefs are and what you practice and all that. And then we kind of related it to metal. But I remember you saying, the answer varies by the practitioner. And so I appreciate that there's a whole host of ways to go about that. But I do think we need to acknowledge that even though you might believe in Satanism as some sort of mystical force or being or power, and I might just say I don't, but I respect all the FU to the church, and I'm a metalhead, and I got the Altar Beast t-shirt on right now.
It's an awesome shirt.
We do have to have some common ground, I think, where in most or a lot or the majority or a fair-sized amount of modern Satanism practice, there is kind of this inherent, and maybe I'm wrong, so correct me, but nod or acceptance of some Abrahamic religious viewpoints. And so if you could just maybe correct me on that or explain maybe how that is or isn't true, I would be interested in that, because I think one thing that you and I specifically, and that, some atheists and some Satanists or left-hand path practitioners in general can agree on, is this kind of distaste for the big church and the big temple and the mosque. And so I do kind of wonder, well, doesn't that create a bit of an awkward situation if you have to, like, you're kind of worshiping, quote unquote, this guy who exists in these religious traditions?
Right. And in some ways, that kind of awkwardness may hold ground in some narrow respects. But
okay.
the conception of Satan is such that, it would be lying to say that there isn't historical precedence for it to be a reactive or it's a countercultural viewpoint or countercultural ideology that comes, and Satan is an anti-hero within a Judeo-Christian framework. There's no getting around that. That's a large part of that informs the left-hand path. But so there's a couple of things to note here. One, even in that context, Satan isn't exactly what he means within a Christian framework. So
okay.
Satan within a left-hand path framework, or any other demon for that, or God for that matter, is not going to exist in the same way he exists in, or she exists in the Christian context, or Abrahamic context, or the context of another religion. Within the left-hand path framework, it takes on a different form.
Sure, like Muslims and Jews acknowledge the, for lack of a better term, let's call it the spiritual badassery of Jesus. It's just he's not the savior.
That's right. So a second part to that is it is only one conception. So, I mean, you have left-hand path adherents that, again, you mentioned a myriad. There is a myriad that will appeal to Tiamat. That'll appeal to, Pan, if they're more on the pagan side, Cernunnos on the pagan side, but demons, Astaroth or Astarte, or there are these... Yeah. Right. So there are... Or demons of like a Chinese or Japanese origin, or... Sure,
Egyptian. Like I know Set's got some traction.
That's right. That's right. Right. So there's all these different roads that aren't of an Abrahamic bent. Having said that, I'm going to take it a bit further and say I think the biblical representation of Satan is also valid. In fact, the way he's presented as this god of criminality, well, even within a Christian context, he was more the prosecutor. He was the district attorney, as Alan Watts says.
Yeah, I was going to say, even in the Bible, I was going to just stop you there and say, Satan in the biblical sense, I don't know if he really is the god of criminality. Now, you could say that Satan in the Christian sense is the god of criminality and evil, but in the biblical sense, I don't know if I go
not
so
in the
far
total,
as to say...
Right. Even in the total biblical sense, there's more to say that he's an emancipator than not. And actually, there's an argument to say that Yahweh is the god of criminality. At least he's a brutal dictator who demands sacrifice and genocide, and he's jealous, and you should not worship anyone but me. As Christopher Hitchens famously said, he's like Kim Jong-un or North Korea. You live in abject slavery to him, and that's true.
You live in a totalitarian system where there is one God you must worship.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's dictatorial, it's totalitarian, and it's fascist in nature. I think there's even Satan within the Bible that isn't going to play out the way that it's going to play in a ubiquitous manner amongst Christians. So I guess in a literal sense, there's going to be a shared space, but it's like, well, I'm believing in Satan in a way that's actually literal. There's no friction, that is to say, that I'm reading the Bible and I'm worshiping your God I'm worshiping one of your gods as he's described. Besides Satan being revered in a way that's outside of the Christian framework. But to even go further, so if we go Christian, New Testament, evangelical, the god of criminality or the god of violence, I think that's okay too. I'm not going to say that every manifestation of the divine is kind and compassionate and full of light and shiny things. I think that...
I'm quite certain that, although I'm an unbeliever, if there is something out there, I'm quite certain you're right, that it's not all lovey and shiny and beautiful.
No, that's right. We have death and we do have suffering. There is the problem of evil, but in my and many left-hand path adherents or believers or practitioners, it's not a problem. The world is full of suffering as well, and it's full of what we would call evil and tribulation and discompassionate type situations and people and things. Your life can end at any moment and there's no real reason for it. And that's the sad reality. Any God that I believe in is going to accommodate for that. Any God that does exist is going to be both beautiful and terrible. Because that's the way our universe is. So even the vile and violent and brutal Satan of the Bible is a valid representation of the divine.
Yeah, I think I would echo that insofar as, or agree with you insofar as, although I am an unbeliever, any God that I could fathom would be, both beautiful and terrible.
Absolutely.
Beautiful and terrible, yeah.
I was going to say, Sam, do you have any closing statements or anything you would like to end things on? Yeah, I'll give you the final word.
Sure, yeah, I would. This has been great.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciated it. I do think that although, we didn't change each other's minds or beliefs, nor did I have the expectation that would happen, I think conversations like this are good. I think it's good to find people who don't agree with you, who don't believe what you believe, and tease out some of these finer points, some of these nuanced points, and really examine them, get them under the light, yours and theirs. And worst case, you're going to learn something. There's always something to be gained, I think, by that. I think, like as some Satanists might put it, knowledge is the greatest gift. So I think there's something good to be learned by that. And I guess my closing argument would be probably what you said when you first came onto my show, which is to question everything. Question all things. It's one of the most powerful things we can do. We might not agree on a lot of this stuff, but I think we could say fuck yeah to a lot of the same things.
It shows, although we have disagreement, we are finding a shared space, no?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, to the believers out there in your audience, whether they're Satanists or left-hand path or some other thing, some other, kind of what I would call minority religion, if you're a pagan or a Wiccan or you believe in the Greco-Roman pantheon, or you're a Christian or a Jew or whatever it is, just question things. Don't be so ready to give whatever power or spirit or God it is that you believe in. Don't be so ready to give him thanks and glory and attribute things that maybe you did, or maybe just happened, or maybe someone else did to that things or persons or beings' glory. And then I would say to my fellow unbelievers out there, don't be such a militant atheist asshole. You know, yeah, they can't prove it. Shea can't prove to me that, you know, some demon helped him out and, you know, made his neighbor trip and fall and break his knee because he was an asshole when Shea prayed for that to happen. But that doesn't mean that you have to just... Yeah, I'm sure he did, the fucking cocksucker. But that doesn't mean you just have to be such a closed-minded dick. There are atheists out there that they're religious in their belief. If you're a true skeptic and you're a true questioner and you're really searching for knowledge and you're searching for answers, you need to have an open mind. So I guess I would say that. And if anyone listening wants to hear more of me, I guess check me out at Steel Legion Podcast. You may not be into metal, but we got lots of love for Satan in the metal community, even if we're not Satanists. But you can hear Shea on episode, 8 and maybe 8 and 28, if I recall that correctly.
Right, something like that.
Yeah, 8 and 28. And
those are great episodes, so I think everyone here, if they enjoyed this conversation, they'll probably enjoy those as well.
I think so. And we got a few other things that are more than just, you know, me talking to metal artists. So a few other episodes that get into these things. And so just thank you for having me on. I love talking about this stuff. I don't always get to do it on my show. So I hope we can find another project to work again on in the future together.
Absolutely, Sam. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a very impactful and enlightening conversation. I appreciate your time, brother. Sam, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Shea. I really appreciate you having me, man.
Thank you for listening and lending your ears to the Deferred Gnosis Podcast. If you wish to connect, please use the contact information in the description below. You can find all the previous episodes and everything else about the podcast at deferredgnosis.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, iTunes, etc., or reach us by email at deferredgnosis@gmail.com. Please send me your topic ideas, suggestions, commentary, things you might want us to discuss. Help us carve out a niche of truth, finding some ground just on the edge of the fringe. And if you're a musician or artist of any kind, please feel free to send me a link of your work. I'd be happy to showcase your work and possibly interview you for the show. Until next time, thank you for listening, and highest cheers from Deferred Gnosis. Ave, hails, as above, so below.
Hey,
No.
speaking of cool news stories, this has also been a couple months ago. Did you hear about the guy that fucking killed that mountain lion with his bare hands?
Dude, I heard something about that. Like, he fucking choked it to death.
Dude, he used his fucking BJJ moves on it and fucking choked it out with one foot while using his other leg to, like, hold down its hind paws and shit.
Fucking dope.
Yeah.